Working Cows Podcast, episode 178.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Conry, host of the Working Cows Podcast, powered by the Global Ag Network. And this morning, I wanted to let you know that one of our favorite ag podcasts, Fieldwork, is back for an all-new season. Co-hosts Mitchell Hora and Zach Johnson are back to talk all things sustainable ag. This season, they'll tackle farm financing innovation, carbon markets, new sustainability standards in crops like cotton, and so much more. They're also doing a special focus on Washington County, Iowa, where Mitchell lives and farms, which has a very strong conservation culture. What's the special sauce, you ask? Well, tune in and find out. Episodes drop weekly on Wednesdays. You can find them at fieldworktalk.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Very excited today to be joined by Daniel Griffith. Daniel is an author and a regenerative agriculturalist. He's working on a pretty neat project there in Virginia, the Timshel Wildland and rewilding, and we're going to talk to him about that, but also about the release of his new book. The pre-order phase is going on right now at Amazon. You can find links to that as well as to the Fieldwork podcast in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/178. We'll have links to all of that. You can go on Amazon and pre-order Daniel's new book, Wild Like Flowers, up there at Amazon. The show notes page will have a link to that. We had to push this back because there was so much demand even in the soft rollout of this that they weren't ready for the pre-order phase. So just to tell you a little bit about the appetite there is for all things regenerative agriculture right now, that's pretty exciting stuff. So head over to workingcows.net/178, find the Fieldwork podcast, find Daniel's pre-order link for his book. And if you pre-order the book, you will get a plein air painting done on Daniel's land, where he is working on this project of rewilding the land. And so if you go there and pre-order it and send him a receipt, email a receipt to the email address that will be up at the show notes page, you will be able to get that bonus for pre-ordering the book. So very neat stuff. Really excited to talk to Daniel today about the process of rewilding and his book, Wild Like Flowers. Daniel, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Hey, Clay, I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me. It's a blessing.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the conversation. You have a new book available for pre-order today on the release of this podcast, and so an opportunity for people to go out from here and sign up to get a free chapter and the pre-release of the book and get on the pre-order list. The book is Wild Like Flowers. And as I was exposed to the content of the book, it made me slow down and look at my context more carefully. Was that among your goals for writing the book?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think so. I mean, what the book Wild Like Flowers is really about, if you want to, fly a plane over it at 30,000 feet and look down and try to understand it, it is to slow down. I've been in regenerative agriculture long enough to know that farming is hard and it's very, very taxing, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, sometimes even financially. But like when you go for a walk in nature, right, everything is different. There's a seemingly, there's a disconnect between like a farmed environment and a nice, gentle walk through the woods. And so a good deal into our journey through regenerative agriculture, we wanted to create more walks in the woods, less long nights trying to wrestle calves and do those sort of farm tasks. And And what came out of it is really what the book's about. It's about slowing down. It's about examining your context, understanding the why of what we do. We look so much at the how, right? The tools, the rotational grazing, poly braid, poly wire. Is the farm a business or is the farm not a business? These are all questions that are great questions, but we ask them a lot. And what we don't ask a lot is that walk in the woods question of, why are we doing this? For what purpose do we do, these actions? And those are all context questions. And so in many ways, I'm thrilled that it forced you to slow down and examine your life, your motivations, your motives, and, your goals and context.
Do you think that the difference between that farming pace, so to speak, and that walk in the woods pace is that in the farming pace we are trying to exert control over that context, whereas the walk in the woods pace is we're here to take it all in, to be observers, to be recipients of the beauty, rather than to try to change it or exert control over it in some way?
Yes, I think that's a brilliant examination of the thing. Absolutely. There's a part in the book where, I talk about how early in our colonial history, in our American colonial history, European modes of animal husbandry were, mocked is probably a strong word. It might actually not be strong enough, depending on, exactly where this took place. But those modes of animal husbandry were mocked by indigenous peoples that inhabited this landscape for thousands of years before we got here. Many, many thousands. And the question is why do we work so hard to manufacture abundance when it really needs, that is abundance, to be prodded and nudged, to be nurtured and harvested? Like, when you actually boil down regenerative agriculture or solar farming or carbon farming or grass farming, right? These are all words we throw around. It really is just herbivore eats grass, poops, moves, eats more grass, poops, moves, whether or not it's through polywire or through a wolf, creating that herd effect naturally in wild landscapes. That's it, right? That is regenerative agriculture, right? And it's such a simple, natural process that happens whether or not we are here or not. We being the human species, it seems that we're, it's manufactured abundance, right? How much can we get out of a land base is often the question, and sometimes that's the right question. But through our attempt to manufacture abundance, we've eradicated predators. Now we have to use polywire and perimeter fencing and, electric chargers, and we have to move the animals. But if the predators were to return, I'll be the first one to quit my job. Like, I'll happily sit back, write books, and just, drink tea and coffee all day watching the predators move the cows for me. That sounds like a great life. I'm totally willing to say that. Yep. Totally.
And so, that's kind of another major piece of the book, and I feel like you're moving towards that idea of wilding in this conversation. Could you tell me a little bit about how you think about that, what you mean by wilding, and how maybe it differs from other ways of looking at what it is that you are doing, what your relationship is, or maybe as you would say in the book, how you are being rather than what you are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So a little bit of history here, I think, is important just to set the stage or to understand context, our context. When we got into farming, our farm name was Timshol Permaculture. And that's really because I was heavily into permaculture at the time. We were farming a lot smaller scale acreage. And we were doing a lot more veggie and fruit ag. As our context evolved or shifted, and as we went from 30 acres to 400 acres, we struggled with the terminology of permaculture just because people would come onto the farm because they're like, oh, permaculture farm. They would arrive and I would show them, 200 head of cattle in a 50-acre field. And they're like, well, where's the food forest, or where's your little, micro gardens and stuff? And so they were let down. So we felt like we had to go through a brand change. But anyways, we ended up with Timshol Wildland. We employed the term wildland in our farm name because we really don't know how else to describe it. Wilding or wildland or rewilding, it's sometimes called. For us, I mean, it really comes down to our lives. We strive for healthy cattle and pigs and sheep in as much as we endeavor to restore wildlife habitat on our land base. We believe that the symbiotic partnership of these instruments, right, cattle, pigs, and sheep with wildlife habitat, these are 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different small wholes within wholes, which is really what holistic management is all about. These things form what we believe to be a melodious symphony of a truly wild, but a very emergent abundance. Emergent is a word that means a lot to us in our operation. Emergence, which I think could be a whole podcast in and of itself, we define as really releasing control, and so that the effect of what we do is so much beyond that which we can create. Right? Emergence is many ways 2 + 2 = 2 or 10 or 20 or 100. We have no idea what it's going to equal. It's definitely not going to be 4. It's always different. It's beyond what we can control to create an abundance so much further and larger and much more powerful than what we can create. So emergence is what we're pushing for. We spend our time counting butterflies and emerging, flowering, pasture grasses and forbs and weeds as much as like we care about finishing weights on our cattle. In fact, what we have found is by counting monarch butterflies and focusing our efforts there, that the finishing weights on our cattle have only gone up over the last 4 years, which I have no idea why. I'm not a scientist, and there's no scientist who wants to come answer that question for me. But I believe if I have to come down to it, if I have to decide on that question, I think it's because when you're looking at a system, it's a system. It's comprised of many smaller holes. The monarch butterfly is a hole. The milkweed that it's feeding on is another small hole. And the cattle, they're another small hole. And there's smaller holes within those holes and larger holes within those holes. There's a lot of holes. Okay. But the point is, systems are systems, and they are comprised of great complexity. What commercial agriculture has tried to do is take complex systems and make them more complicated. Complicated systems can be rebuilt. They're prescriptions, they're practices, right? For instance, if somebody were to say, hey, Clay, move your cows 7 times a day, put them at 300,000 pound stock density, right? And I guarantee you'll grow an inch of topsoil every single year, right? That would be unbelievable. But that's not possible. Why? It's because your geologic context, your biotic context, your geobiochemical context is different. Your farm is different. Your cows are different. Your soils are different. You have a different whole than what I have, right? And so when you're looking at your whole and managing it, you have to do that via your own context. But that context has to take into the whole. It has to take into account the whole of what the thing is, right? The monarch butterflies, the milkweed, and the cattle. And when you step back and let nature emerge by focusing on everything and not a singular species, i.e. cattle, what you find is that everything benefits from that management style. And so maybe said a different way, if that was too elongated or unclear, it's really, we think that the driver or animals are life forms, really all life, biota, within this great biome of ours, are the drivers of ecosystem succession. Humans, managers, land managers, are riding in the passenger seat to help direct them where they're going, right? Just think of yourself, with your wife in the car you're driving. She has, Google Maps on her phone. She's like, hey, Clay, turn left here. That's what we're doing with the cattle, right? Their foot is on the gas pedal. We're just trying to help them get there. Maybe a little bit faster, if that's the context. Maybe a little bit slower. I've seen context where, they just want to move a little bit more slowly through the landscape. Maybe there's a whole, back seat full of screaming lambs and pigs and goats and chickens and ducks, or maybe it's just sheep back there. But it's just a different view of what farming could be. I don't know. There's many ways to dive into there. I'm trying to stay as high level as possible. I'm sure this is like a 10-hour conversation.
No, it's really good, and I appreciate it. And I don't know how to frame this question without it sounding like an us versus them context. But where where traditional agriculture focuses on yield, be that pounds or bushels, wilding focuses on abundance. Would you say that that's maybe an apt comparison?
Yeah, I think so, and I appreciate the intro into that question, because in the book it's very clear, and I say it multiple times. Hey, listen, there's no need to cast blame, right? Who we blame and how we blame them or why we would blame them, these are all large questions that I'm not here to answer, and frankly, I don't care, right? There doesn't need to be a you and an us conversation. But yeah, abundance is probably a really good word. A word that I would use is relationship.
Mm.
I believe the truly regenerative system is formed first by relationship. It's when you perceive the natural world or the farmed environment, or I think that's the same thing, but when you perceive that through a very living grammar, Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, it's one of the best books out there. If you've not read it, I encourage you to read it, put it down, pick it back up, read it again, and then decide if you should do it a third time. It is brilliant. Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Or she describes this not as a living grammar, but a grammar of animacy. That's her verbiage, and it's brilliant. But perceived through that living grammar, a tree or a cow or a carrot, these are some ones, not some things. Make sure I say that right. Right. We have relationship with carrots, with cows, with trees, with pasture species, Indian grass versus broom sedge, right? Some people might have a very negative relationship with broom sedge, but, they might like the orchard grasses or the Indian grasses or, whatever. I'm throwing out grasses from our region, temperate climate, Eastern United States. But the point is, it's that relationship to the life forms that makes the whole world of difference. But what it does, and this is the point, is communication within that relationship transforms harvests, not into yield, not into maximizing the number of bushels of corn you get out of a 1,000-acre cornfield, right? But communicating within this relationship and developing that relationship actually transforms harvests into communion. Communion is the word. And that perspective is unbelievably life-changing, right? When you see harvest as communion, right, you're actually communing with, right, but you're also partaking in a meal to express a deep relationship with that something. Everything changes in abundance, emergent abundance, rich yields come following it, but you focus on the relationship and the yields follow. At least that's what the book's about,
Yeah, and kind of back to that earlier conversation about the walk in the woods. That's part of it, that being present, and I think as you talk about in the book, receiving from nature gifts given. That's part of that yield for us as communers, as people in communion with our context, is receiving from. That's part of it. That's part of what we're getting out of it. If you would like to distill it down in that way, I guess, would that be? Am I on the same path here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, said another way, I'm always a fan. I mean, the book is 130 pages. It's a small book. Sometimes I say it's a small spell book because it's very magically written and it's more poetic than, rooted in prose, but it's a small book. So I like simple things. But said a different way, more simple way, it's walking out to the pasture and asking, what do you want to become? Right. I have no issue with seed, no-till, seed drills. I have no issue with annual, cool season, warm season plants. In the off season, if you want to drill those into the pastures, they extend your growing season. Like, I have no issues with these regenerative practices. But through this book, what I'm arguing, or what I really emphasize in my teaching and consulting side of my life, is you must first walk out to the pasture and ask, what does it want to become? Right? If living systems are in fact living as you and I are living, then it has a roadmap. It has a roadmap that you and I won't really ever understand. It speaks a language, it being the pasture, speaks a language you and I can't hear, right? I'm not saying that there's a pasture and it's a human being and they speak language. That's not the point here. The point is that pastures are living, grasses are living, cows are living, right? So like, when was the last time you actually walked out to the pasture and asked, what do you want to become?
Mm-hmm.
Or when you're moving your cows, like in the book, I talk about how to move, a couple hundred head of cows. Like, don't worry about stock handling or low stress handling. Just ask them, look at them in the face and say, can you follow me? And not that they're going to respond to that, right? I'm not some, crazy kook, right? That's just off his rocker. But that position of humility that you have forced yourself into, to get down onto the level of the face of a cow and ask if something can occur, cows will follow that. That is low stress stockmanship, writ, right? In a very practical, but a very special medium. Just ask, they'll follow.
It goes back to that idea of, we are coming to the grass, we are coming to the paddock with our agenda in traditional agriculture, or even traditional regenerative agriculture, if you will. We're coming to that paddock with our agenda, rather than saying we are going to manage this resource in the best way that we can and let the paddock's agenda come to the surface.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean that you can't, drill some, clovers into a legumeless environment. I'm not saying that you can't do those things, but ask first and see what the pasture responds with. Let it talk. Give it time to respond in its own way. It's talking. We just have to listen.
And that the agenda of that paddock is formed by the microbiome of that paddock. I would assume that they have an agenda, and there's a succession of plants that is going to occur if we will allow it to, and ultimately that this whole conversation just continues to envelop on itself, but ultimately that whole process of allowing that paddock to express its own agenda, so to speak, is going to result in greater abundance, more healthy relationship, all those things. Is that part of what you're trying to communicate here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled that you went there, because now it gives me the ability to ask the question of, like, do you see where we are? We're talking about relationships again, right? I mean, we're talking about the microbiome of a pasture is what? It's the emerging communion and communication and community of relationship. And so when you boil it down, that's why the book is called Wild Like Flowers. Subtitle is The Restoration of Relationship Through Regeneration. Relationship comes first. Regeneration is a byproduct of relationship. Think about the difference between dirt and soil. Right? Soil is dirt, I should say, is relationless soil, right? It's the same thing. It's just soil has a lot more relationships included within it. Therefore, it is alive and it's thriving. The nematodes are eating the fungi and the bacteria and the protozoas, right? They're all working together. The cows are putting the nutrients back to the soil surface, or, trampling it, or, right? We don't have to dive into the soil food web, but high level, that's a relationship.
I don't know if you're open to this, and I've never done it before on the podcast, but I would like to ask you to read a couple of selections if you're open to that.
Yeah, why not?
I've got a couple in mind. If you're,
why don't you do it? I wrote the thing, and I'll just read you the whole book. So,
do you want me to select them? Do you want me to?
Yeah, tell me the page. I'm looking at the one that I sent you. So,
yep, last paragraph of page 36 through the end of that chapter. Essentially, it's 3 paragraphs.
Well, let me pull that up.
So,
this is fun.
Yeah, I'm getting my. Oh man, what's the lady from Fresh Air who does the interviews in Fresh Air on NPR? I'm getting that vibe going with having the author read portions of their book. But Terry Gross.
Nope.
There we go. Terry Gross.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, it's funny. You picked the paragraph and I'm sure you made the conclusion from this, but I use Shakespeare a lot to define regenerative ag. So like, if you're into Shakespeare and regenerative ag, read this book. Shakespeare is quoted pretty much all the way through it, or at least I use Shakespeare's plays to describe things that I'm not worthy of describing in my own words. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. Anyways, yeah. So at the last paragraph of page 36 through the end of the chapter.
Yeah.
Cool. Using rewilded grazing and foraging animals within wild and seemingly chaotic management systems as the drivers of ecosystem succession and habitat creation, our wildland is attempting to restore the dynamics of wildlife and wild process on our land, a vision that places human life a bit closer to being native to this place. If only our guests could have been here for the sunrise. Up flung the light, I now know why. Although we are building soil, sequestering carbon, restoring biodiversity, and regenerating our water mineral cycles through the holistic and regenerative management of our place, we are also learning to stop and to listen and to see. We are learning to enter the forests of Ardennes, that's the Shakespeare reference, to lose control of the court and submit ourselves to the counsel of the wild. Perhaps we are building soil and the rest of it because we first learned to stop moving and to start being. Our wildland is our canvas, but anywhere can be yours. That is up to you. We can learn to nurture awareness and thereby connection and community to achieve a truly holistic communion right where we are. That is another funny thing about life. It is often right where you are. Yes, life's ordinariness is its most surprising characteristic. Daybreak's preamble taught me that.
Yeah. And as you're reading, I'm sitting there and thinking about where we've been in this conversation. And, you think about, and you talk a lot about the indigenous peoples and their relationship to their context and kind of the maybe mocking isn't the right word, but maybe it is the right word of the animal husbandry of the Westerner. And I think that there was a lot of mystery that they were accounting for in and through their relationships. And now we are able to, on maybe even a minute scale, explain some of what they saw as mystery, as we know about relationships between nematodes and bacteria and fungi and the different things that are going on there. And I think that I think we are maybe even just seeing the tip of that iceberg. But I think that, right. But I think that the problem is, or what Western agriculture brought was technology that didn't take into account any of those relationships. And so we missed out on a lot of that abundance, even though we were able to produce high yields and some of those things. So I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to wrap my head around and trying to articulate with words about where we're at in this conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll maybe this is a fun little tidbit that nobody else in this world knows, that your podcast listeners will be the only ones to know. Little spicy treat or whatever. The book was originally titled Yahweh, Yawe,
Mm-hmm.
Yahweh. It's a word from the Bodewad Minwen language, a dialect of Algonquin, a language that's 3,500 years old. Put some numbers to it, but anyways, Bodewad Minwen, a language or dialect of the Potawatomi people. Their language is very different from our language. I would probably argue it's better. It's more adequate for describing things which are hard to describe, but it doesn't see. And if you can go back to high school or college when you learned a foreign language and you had to remember that, like, by the way, I failed at foreign languages. So I'm going to butcher this one, but like la, boy in Spanish, where it's like le, and there's females. There's a female and a male, or a masculine and a feminine, if I can speak more properly, nouns and verbs, and we understand the world in that sort of distinct section, male and female, masculine and feminine. Bodhi Wad Minwen doesn't. It doesn't see the difference between a male and a female, not in the form of their grammar, but rather in terms of the living and the non-living. So when they're talking, and they're using, their language to convey thoughts and relationships, right? Communication is relationship. They're talking about non-living and living life. But anyways, all of that is not that interesting. The real interesting thing is the word to be, okay, in Bodewad Minwen, to describe a living thing. So to be a human, to be an apple, to be a bird, to be a tree. These are all living nouns, things, is the word Yahweh. Y-A-W-E, Yahweh. Yahweh is a word that they describe life with, in the same way that, the ancient Hebrews described, when God came down and was burning, was in the story of Moses in the burning bush. He said, "Who are you?" He said, "I am who I am." Right. And in many ways, that word in original Hebrew is Yahweh with an H at the end. The similarities are unbelievably potent. Maybe that's not a conversation we need to dive down. Maybe we can. I would love to spend time with it. It was going to be the title of the book, Yahweh. It's a story about being life, not doing life, not fostering life, not manufacturing life, just being life. What if farming was being life and not manufacturing it? What would our world look like? And that's really the point of the book. The point of the book is Yahweh. It's a focus on a living grammar that understands the created world as unbelievably magical, scientific, absolutely, but magical. In a world of being, not as much doing.
And I think that's right. And we can, like we said, you can explain the tip of that iceberg scientifically, but people who are honest will tell you that, and the rest of it is at this point, according to our ability to explain, it is magical. It's just beyond what we can understand and explain at this point. But we know that if we're willing to have patience, that we can see some of those things kind of heal themselves if we're willing to get out of the way and have patience.
Yeah, I mean, take a soil food web course from Nicole Masters or Elaine Ingham, and give me a call when you're done and tell me if you're not overwhelmed by the simple magic of the thing.
Yeah.
Like, what? This is unbelievable. It's complex. It's amazing. It's abundant. In many ways, it's emergent, but it's unbelievable. The thing is magic itself. Like, who invited the protozoa and the nematodes, right, to a party with bacteria and fungi, and then why are the plants like putting carbon packets full of sugar into the soil for the bacteria to consume, and then why are the protozoa consuming bacteria? Or, that's where I get a little bit lost. You need to ask Nicole Masters and linking them at that point. But anyways, the point is just like, what is going on? This is magical. So this book is about taking that magic and putting it on top of the soil. What if the relationship between the grazer, the manager, meaning you and I, and the pasture or the silvopasture or the forested land, wherever that relationship is occurring, what if that was equally as magical, right? Like, why can't it be? It absolutely can be, but what if it was just as abundant? What if its magic was just as abundant? What a different world we would live in.
Can you tell me about how you think about the differences between control and management?
Absolutely. Let's start here. Charles Eisenstein is a gentleman who's written many books. I think they're all very good books, great books, some of them. But in one of his books, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, that's the book title. Eisenstein writes that Newton and all of these physicists were absolutely correct when they, postulated force equals mass times acceleration and E equals blah, blah, blah. That's all right. I'm not going to contest that one slice. But if objects, and this is Newton, are in motion because they're put in motion, right? That means that the motion of objects is limited by the motion in which put them in motion, right? the result of an object's motion is limited by the initial force, right? That actually set that object in motion. And so what he concluded in this chapter, and I think it's brilliant, he does it very poetically and a lot better than I'm doing here. But what he concludes is that control limits abundance. It produces some abundance, but the necessity of control to manufacture abundance is thereby a limit, right? Because an object motion can only be, as fast or as slow or as static or as, movable as the object that put it in motion, which is that control. So control makes abundance limited. And so management, and this is hopefully going to answer your question, management is not control. Management is in many ways sitting in, as I said earlier, the passenger seat of a car and helping the drivers of ecosystem succession, right? Wild animals, whether or not it's a butterfly or a cow or a carrot, to drive that ecosystem succession, to drive it to a more resilient and regenerative state. Management is the passenger seat, whereas a controlled environment is, I don't want to be too cruel or too mean, but like it's tying the cow and putting it in the back trunk, right? That's control, right? That's all you're going to get is a cow in the back trunk, or let's say a trailer, because that's probably more viable. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yeah. No, I think that in a controlled environment, you will get out of it what you put into it. But in a managed environment, you're going to get out more than what you put into it because you weren't responsible for all the inputs.
Well, yeah. Well, you opened up the playing field for inputs to emerge. Right. Abundance is not the only emergent characteristic in a wild type system. The inputs are in many ways also emergent. Like I always tell folks, the reason I farm, initially was because I was decently dying and I needed a health fix. Due to a couple diseases that I have. But the reason that I continue farming is my favorite thing in this entire world is to jump on a four-wheeler or UTV or farm truck with my family and, wife and 3 kids. And we just drive around the farm looking for emergence, right? And then in the distance, we see like a faint glow of like this deep purple velvet type color. And we go over there and it's ironweed, and ironweed emerged here and not over there for the first time in 5 years. We've never seen ironweed here. But that one summer day, we saw it and it was coming through and it was beautiful. But like, I didn't put it there. I don't know who put it there. It might have been in the soil. It might have been carried in the fur or the manure of a cow. Who knows? A bird might have dropped, some different seeds, might have flown in on the exact, on the airwaves. But that emergence, witnessing that emergence and the magic of the thing itself is my absolute favorite part of farming.
Yep. And we are in this frame of thought, or in this paradigm of thinking, we are okay with that emergence. We are assuming that emergence is there for a reason, and it's going to accomplish a succession that will leave us more, if I can continue to borrow your language, more abundant than we would be without it.
Yeah, and to be clear, to play a devil's advocate here, is sometimes what emerges is not exactly the favorable species. For instance, there's areas on our farm where poison hemlock is emerging. It's coming. And in the springtime, poison hemlock grows really well in a cool season environment. It's 10 feet tall and deeply poisonous to humans and cattle and pigs and sheep alike. It's having a relationship. Relationships are not always easy. Sometimes they're very hard. My relationship with poison hemlock is very hard. It's hard to swallow that is what this land base at this time needs. The funny thing is, when you actually look at it from like a Google Maps historical satellite image perspective, that is where hay has been fed on this farm for about a decade before we bought it. And if you imagine that hay wasn't good hay, chemical-free hay, overly, nitrogen field produced hay. Who knows the actual biome that hay was grown in, let alone harvest, let alone, fed. But something is happening there where healing is occurring. It's just not the healing, or it's not the roadway that we would have picked, right? I don't necessarily I'm not sitting here thinking, oh, if poison hemlock would only occur over there, it would heal that environment. No, but it's what the pasture wanted, right? It's what this world, this wildland that we partner with, that we manage, we do not control, but we manage, needs to fix itself there. The ironweed was there, the poison hemlock's over there. They're both doing the same thing, right? Helping ecosystem succession push to a more resilient state. Sometimes to get to a resilient state, you first have to heal. And that healing can be painful, which is what poison hemlock means to me.
So just to flesh that out a little bit, does that mean there is no plucking up of that poison hemlock? You're just not interacting, with those places, with your critters, for lack of a better term. Is that how you're handling that, or what does that look like in your management going forward?
Brilliant question. And I'll answer it very simply, and then we can dive deeper into it. We graze the crap out of it. We run animals hard there, real hard. Pigs, sheep, cattle. We've even done some chickens in the poison hemlock stands. Type into Google, can cows, pigs, sheep, or chicken eat poison hemlock? It'll say no, they'll die immediately. I am not telling you that you should do it on your farm. What I'm telling you is if you have a relationship with your animals, you'll know. That's it. I know my animals. I mean, we have probably 1,000 animals on this farm today. Maybe a little less. Sometimes we have, 2,000 or 3,000, depending on the seasons. But I know them. We have relationships with every one of them. Every one of our cows is named. Like there's a lot of other podcasts here that we maybe should have, but like every one of our cows, and there's hundreds of them, have a name. And if we're driving them, 2 miles across the farm and all of their name, their ear tags are facing the other direction, and I'm just looking at their bums, I can tell you their names of every one of them. We have relationships with these animals, and I know what they can forage for, and I know that they'll not touch it. Because I've spent time with them, right? I know their foraging habits and tendencies. Maybe if I could say this one last bit, part of wilding, part of having what we call a wild land, there is some practice involved. For instance, we don't castrate any of the animals on our farm. We don't wean any animals. We don't separate any of our animals. Our bulls are always with our cows, with our heifers, there's just one whole herd, and the flock of sheep is one whole flock, and all of our pigs are together. Our boar never leaves any of our sows. He's never eaten a baby piglet, has never stepped on a baby piglet. The relationships are intact. But that was after a period of time, right? We have to develop a relationship with the thing. And over a period of time, we cut out a lot of the control over our environment. And I'm using the control word here in a very different way than we have been using it. Like when a boy is born, let's say a bull calf, it's going to be a bull calf into a bull for the rest of its life until it lives no more. And so how that emerges, how that relationship emerges within the herd it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. But what it creates is a very different herd, a very exciting herd, and definitely a very abundant herd. I mean, breedback percentages went up as soon as we stopped castrating, weaning, and separating. We're at nearly 100% breedback percentages, 0% calf morbidity, never vaccinated or ever had health issues, never pulled a calf. We can go on. I don't like to go on, to be very clear. I think if you're going to look at losing some control over the farm landscape, you need to do it because your relationships told you that that's what you should do, and you have a context that demands it, not because you're trying to maximize breedback percentages. The book is very clear about that, and I am very clear about that in other areas of my professional life. Lose control because you don't want it, right? That you don't value it, or that relationships are telling that you should lose it, not again because of breedback percentages. But anyways, my point is to dive deep into that was just to say we know our animals, and our animals know us, and they know the land base. And we don't call animals that don't produce calves or lambs or piglets for us, because we see the system is a little bit more large. It's more holistic than simple breedback percentages type management would demand. Like, for instance, we have like a 15-year-old cow that hasn't had a calf in like 3 years, but she's 15 years old. She's brilliant. She's a wise elder. Call her a medicine cow, right? I mean, whatever verbiage or lingo you want to use, what she is giving to the herd is so much more than the potential, calf. So much more than that. She's teaching them how to forage and what plants to consume or not to consume. She's helping them move from paddock to paddock. She's helping keep the younger calves and, yearling heifers in check. And I mean, that's probably even 1/100th of what she's really doing. It's a different form of relationship that this management produces. But I don't know.
No, that's good.
A lot of stuff there.
I know. I appreciate it. I think I shared this. I probably shared it on this podcast. I think I shared it recently on another podcast, but things have been a little wild here for me lately, so I'm not sure. But I'll share it again. Part of the inspiration for this podcast was a trip I took to the Maxwell Ranch in extreme northern Colorado. I don't know if part of it even lays in Wyoming or not, but there they deal with larkspur, and he said we have the privilege of having larkspur that's poisonous year-round, and they switch their calving season from March to May, and that comes along with a pretty large cow depreciation hit because a March calving cow is worth more than a May calving cow in this part of the world. And so me being the zealot that I was at that time said, well, why didn't they just trade these cows in for May calving cows and pocket the the difference as far as revenue to the business? And one of the instructors of the High Plains Ranch Practicum, multiple time guest of the Working Cows podcast, Aaron Berger, said because these cows that he has here know not to eat larkspur, and so the value of that was greater than the depreciation hit that he would have taken, or that he did take, by moving them from March to May. So I think that goes along with some of what you're talking about with a 15-year-old cow who hasn't had a calf in 3 years. She's doing other things like teaching younger cows how to graze and forage and passing along that nutritional wisdom.
Yeah, again, it's relationship, right? And the beautiful thing of what you're saying, and we're able to say very simply, is that the relationship that I'm talking about is not necessarily from Clay to his cows, right? It's from its cows to its cows, and from the cows to the land, right? There's many different relationships occurring in a farmed and wild environment, and we have to respect, honor, and cultivate all of them. Or maybe nurture is a better word. Nurture the relationships of all of them. And abundance can result from that. I really believe it. I mean, we're seeing it in our land. We're seeing it in a lot of the land that we do consultation and training work for, all across North Carolina, Kentucky, and Virginia here. We're witnessing the abundance of letting go, of not working, just not doing. Don't focus as much on doing and focus more on being. And what you'll find is you still work a lot, right? Farming is never not going to be hard. But the abundance that you harvest is a communion, right? Not a yield that you maximize. It's a very spiritual and emotional thing. It's not simply a number.
Absolutely. I think that the industrial and the technological revolution, for a lot of people, shrunk the God of the gaps down to the half second before the Big Bang. They were able, or so they thought, were able to explain everything in the world, all those relationships, except for that half second before before the Big Bang. And they would say, if you'll grant us that half second before, we can explain everything else. And I think that maybe some of what we're talking about here is the reopening of that God of the gaps to a lot larger sphere than it had been maybe even 10 or 15 years ago, with some of the things that we're just now, as we've talked about, starting to get the tip of that iceberg and starting to see there's a way more going on here in the relationships and the nutritional wisdom of these cows and their ability to select very well the forages that they need.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, if you want it made plain to yourself, I think you just have to ask, what is the root of the regenerative movement? Right? It's that these things worked 500 years ago, and therefore they're going to work today.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it is, right? Rotational grazing is not special. There's nothing new here, right? It's relying on that herds naturally move due to predator pressures and seasonal demands. And so if we have herds without predators, in many ways that's the case, we have to move them. And so we do. But the abundance that follows the moving isn't because the polywire is some technological innovation that builds soil. It's not, right? It's string with metal going through it. It is technology, but it is not that creative. The point is the polywire isn't creating herd effect. Right? It's because the herd is there, and we now know, right, the historical foundations of what the effects of predators were. Many tangents you can go through, that are derived from that conversation. One of which is that regenerative agriculture should be, much more humble.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're just recreating what was.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're doing. And it's brilliant. I think humility is a massive strength that our culture sees as not a strength. It's a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think humility is one of the greatest strengths of any life form. But I mean, anyways, I mean, it's a really interesting conversation, right? I mean, if regenerative agriculture is needed, it's because science in many ways has destroyed what was there in the beginning. But through science, right, optimizing regenerative agriculture through science is also what's going to get us back. So science is not to blame. I don't think that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
But like you're saying, it's the Industrial Revolution that allowed us to say, hey, listen, this 1,000 acre cornfield, instead of picking it, with 100 workers by hand after 1 week, what if we created this combine that did it, perfectly for us? That's not a bad invention, right? And I'm skipping over some historical hurdles here that, are present with us today with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything else. In many ways, the combine is allowing us to produce food at a different economic model. I'll say it that way. And I think this is very good. The question we have today is, should we grow corn? I'm not saying we shouldn't. But should we grow it, or how should we grow it, or how should we approach growing it, or should we ask the corn if it wants to be grown? And I don't mean to look at the kernels of corn in a seed packet and ask like, hey, do you want to be grown? I'm saying get a relationship with the thing. Don't see it as a seed you put in the ground and then you just cut down at the end and consume it, right? Like some fat kid eating McDonald's, right? Like that's not what I'm pushing here. What I'm pushing here is to have a relationship with all life around you, so that your dining room table, and this is part of the book, it's my favorite chapter, but if you perceive the world, and especially the farmed environment, from this relationship-based perspective, and if harvest is communion and not a yield, then our dining room tables, when we look at them, we should immediately think they need more chairs. There is more life and abundance at our dining room tables than we've ever imagined. And I mean that from a human socio-economic perspective. And I mean that from a pure nourishment perspective, right? It's unbelievable what results by just looking at relationship and focusing there.
Very, very good discussion. And obviously many, many more discussions stem from this one. I think we covered maybe 1.5 of the questions I sent you ahead of time. And
one.
Yeah, very good. How should we direct people to get the book? The show notes page for today is workingcows.net/178. We'll have links to all of that, so people will be able to go to workingcows.net/178, and there will be a link there. Where's that link going to send them to pre-order the book?
Yeah, so right now we're focusing all attention on Amazon. The book will be on Amazon, or is on Amazon, depending on when this airs. Wildlife Flowers, the restoration of relationship through regeneration. Pre-order the book on Amazon. It means the world to us. One of the goals, the book, and this is an important note, the book doesn't promote practices or or even give prescriptions to ailments. It's a book about being, not doing. And so it runs a very middle ground in the regenerative movement, meaning if you move your cows once every 12 days, or you move, your cows 12 times a day, it doesn't matter. This book is written to you. And so in that way, we hope it's really picked up by a lot of people. The cost is hopefully very accessible, and the book length was written and kept small so that it wasn't a large read. It's heavily packed. Clay, if you remember it's every sentence is thick. It's a very pregnant type book, but it's very small and very accessible. And so the pre-order process means the world to us, especially when it comes down to Amazon distribution. Amazon, and talk to Diana Rogers about this in her book, Sacred Cow. Amazon totally underestimated how many sales that book was going to have. It just didn't stock enough. And we want to prove to the world that regeneration is possible, and Amazon is a good place to start. Well, anyways, I say all those things to say this. If you pre-order the book, send the receipt to an email address that will be in the show notes. No reason to say it here. But send your receipt to the email address in the show notes, and you'll receive an actual gift from me. I'll be sending out all these gifts as thank yous for pre-ordering. The gift, if I can say it, I'm really excited to say it. The cover of the book is actually a custom plein air portrait that we commissioned on the farm of our Wildland. And the free gift is an 8x10 print of really high quality print for you to hang in your home or put on your desk. And so that's our gift to you. So pre-order the book, send your receipt to the email address in the show notes, and we'll send you back some blessings and gratitude for the relationship of buying the book. So
in closing, I'll read the first and the last sentence of a note from the author, and it kind of goes back to what you're saying, but I appreciate it. Any persons looking in this book for prescriptions or practices should be disappointed. This book is about being, not doing. Leave your poly braid at the door.
I love that last one. I'm sorry, I did too.
Yep, it was good. I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate your time today. Appreciate the book. Definitely, I gave up very, very quickly. I gave up trying to highlight passages that I wanted to call attention to on this episode, and decided that we'd just make it more of a conversation about kind of a large scale overview of the ideas contained in the book, and then hopefully send some people towards pre-ordering of the book. So thank you for your time today, Daniel.
I hope the conversation was edifying. I know I enjoyed it immensely. So I hope everybody else did, even a percentage of that. So yeah, it was a blessing. Thanks, Clay.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Daniel. Again, check out the Fieldwork podcast. Check out Daniel's book and the pre-order link up at workingcows.net/178. Next week on the show, really excited to talk to Dallas Mount about the grazing principles. We have usually talked to Dallas about people problems on the Working Cows podcast, so I decided to give him a break this time and talk to him about the grazing principles as they were taught at Ranching for Profit school that I recently attended. So look forward to that on episode 179 of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.